They didn't panic because the season was slipping away. They panicked because something far worse was starting to surface. You could feel it building long before anyone inside the organization admitted it out loud. Every snap carried more tension. Every hit landed louder than the last. And every week that passed without change made one thing impossible to ignore. Cleveland was testing how much damage a young quarterback could take before something irreversible happened. From the outside, it looked like patience. Inside, it felt like paralysis. Fans begged, analysts warned, and the film told the same brutal story over and over again. Protection breaking down, pockets collapsing instantly, a quarterback forced to make survival decisions instead of football decisions. And yet, nothing moved. Not until the pressure crossed a line where waiting stopped being safe and started becoming reckless. That's the part most people missed. This wasn't a calculated rebuild moment. This wasn't strategy unfolding on schedule. This was an organization reacting to the realization that they were inches away from repeating a mistake that's haunted them for years. The kind of mistake that doesn't just lose games, it derails careers before they ever get a chance to fully form. What changed wasn't the scheme. It wasn't a breakout performance. It was fear. Fear of wasting something rare. Fear of breaking confidence instead of building it. Fear that if they didn't act now, there wouldn't be a next season version of this quarterback to save. So when the move finally came, it wasn't loud, flashy, or celebrated. It was quiet, almost desperate, and that's exactly why it mattered. Because when a franchise known for hesitation suddenly chooses urgency, it's not confidence talking, it's awareness. Awareness that the window to protect the future was closing fast. Awareness that survival football was no longer acceptable. And awareness that one more delay might have turned a promising story into another warning sign fans have seen too many times before. And what happened next would make it very clear just how close Cleveland was to letting history repeat itself. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so unsettling. The breakdown came in pieces, scattered across weeks, disguised as bad luck or things that take time. A missed block here, a free rusher there, one more hit chalked up to growing pains. But underneath all of it, the same pattern kept replaying, and everyone watching could feel the tension rising. Each snap started to feel heavier, like something was bending that wasn't meant to bend this early. Fans saw it before the front office did, or maybe they just refused to admit it publicly. The frustration poured out everywhere. Game threads turned into panic rooms. Clips of blown protection spread faster than highlights. Every time the pocket collapsed in under 2 seconds, the message was the same. This isn't sustainable. And the longer nothing changed, the louder the reaction became. Not outrage anymore, desperation. Inside the building, the pressure didn't need to be spelled out. You could see it in the play calling, shifting towards shorter throws, quicker releases, anything to avoid another clean hit. That alone said more than any press conference ever could. When an offense starts shrinking to protect its quarterback, it's not strategy, it's damage control. And it meant the problem was already bigger than they were willing to say. What made it worse was the contrast. Week after week, the quarterback kept standing back up. No public complaints, no visible frustration boiling over, just calm responses, reset after reset, as if absorbing hits was simply part of the job. That composure should have been reassuring, but instead it raised a darker question. How long could that last before something cracked, physically or mentally? This was the tipping point. The moment when waiting stopped being patience and started looking like neglect. Because franchises don't lose quarterbacks in one play. They lose them by slowly convincing themselves that tomorrow will be better without making it safer today. Cleveland had seen that movie before, and as the hits piled up and the noise outside grew impossible to ignore, it became clear that doing nothing was no longer an option. And once that realization set in, everything the Browns had avoided was about to catch up with them. When the move finally happened, it didn't come with headlines or bold promises, no splashy announcement, no victory laps, just a quiet adjustment that on the surface looked easy to overlook. But that was exactly why it mattered, because in a season full of public denial, this was the first action that admitted something had gone wrong. Elevating Kendrick Green wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It wasn't even about believing he was the missing piece. It was about urgency, about stepping away from the comfort of waiting and accepting that perfection was no longer on the table. The Browns had spent weeks hoping continuity would solve the problem, that chemistry would magically appear if they just stayed the course. This move said the opposite. It said waiting had already cost them too much. Mid-season offensive line changes don't happen unless something is broken. Teams hate disruption. They especially hate admitting mistakes while the season is still unfolding. And yet, here Cleveland was, breaking its own habits and doing it in real time. That's why this wasn't a depth move. It was a signal to the locker room, to the coaches, and to the fans that protecting the quarterback was no longer an off-season talking point. It was a right-now problem. Pulling someone up from the practice squad might not inspire confidence in a vacuum, but context changes everything. This wasn't about star power. It was about placing a body between the quarterback and the chaos immediately. No more waiting for development curves, no more excuses about injuries or timing, just action, however imperfect, because the alternative was continuing to roll the dice with the most important position on the field. And that's where the shift really happened. For the first time all season, the Browns stopped acting like they were managing a long-term plan and started behaving like a team in crisis that finally understood what was at stake. The message was clear, even if it wasn't spoken out loud. We've delayed long enough. One more week could change everything, and not in a good way. But this move didn't just say something about the offensive line. It revealed how the organization truly felt about the quarterback standing behind it. Every week, the pressure came faster, not just from defenses, but from the situation itself. Rushers screaming off the edge, pockets caving before routes could even develop, decisions that had to be made instantly, sometimes before a receiver had finished his break. This wasn't a rookie being eased into the league. This was a quarterback being thrown into survival mode and told to figure it out on the fly. What stood out wasn't the hits themselves, it was how routine they became. Quarterbacks aren't supposed to normalize contact like that, especially this early. And yet, snap after snap, Shedeur Sanders kept responding the same way. Eyes up, quick resets, no visible panic. That kind of composure isn't taught, and it's definitely not common when the environment around you is collapsing. It showed up in the small moments, sliding protections with limited time, checking down instead of forcing hero throws, knowing when to live for the next snap. The film told a harsher story than the box score ever could. Flush left, throw away, free rusher, quick release, collapsing middle, escape just long enough to keep the play alive. These weren't plays drawn up to succeed, they were moments of adaptation. And while the numbers didn't always shine, the decision-making did. Coaches and fans started noticing that even under constant fire, his mistakes weren't reckless, they were controlled. Then came the interviews, calm, measured, almost unsettling in how steady they were. No finger-pointing, no public frustration, just acknowledgement that things had to be cleaner, that protection mattered, that growth was still happening. That tone began to shift the conversation inside the building, because when a young quarterback takes punishment like that without unraveling, it forces people around him to look in the mirror. That's when the pressure turned inward, because if Sanders could keep showing up composed while getting hit that often, what excuse did the organization have for letting it continue? His resilience became both an asset and an indictment, proof that something rare was developing, and a reminder that it wouldn't survive forever without help. And once that realization set in, the narrative around him began to change in ways Cleveland couldn't ignore. Closer attention, Jimmy Haslam's presence became harder to miss. More visibility, more meetings, more involvement in the day-to-day pulse of the team. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but anyone familiar with Cleveland's history knows what that kind of movement signals. When ownership leans in like that, it's because tolerance is running out. What made this moment different was timing. This wasn't an off-season reset or a post-mortem after things collapsed. This was happening midstream while the season was still unfolding. That alone spoke volumes. It suggested there was a shared understanding forming, that waiting until later wasn't safe anymore, that letting Sanders absorb hit after hit without adjustment risked undoing more than just a season's worth of progress. Inside the locker room, players picked up on it quickly. You could sense the shift in accountability, the shorter leash for mistakes, the urgency in adjustments. When leadership changes tone, everyone feels it. The Browns weren't projecting calm anymore. They were acknowledging reality. And that reality was simple. This team's future was under center, and everything else had to bend around that truth. But as the internal pressure mounted, something else became clear. Help wasn't just needed on offense. While most of the attention stayed locked on the chaos up front, the shift on the other side of the ball quietly started to change the entire equation. Denzel Ward's return didn't come with dramatic build-up or celebration, but the impact showed up almost immediately. Routes tightened, windows shrank, drives stalled. And for the first time in weeks, the defense started giving the offense something it hadn't had in a long time: breathing room. That stability matters more than most people realize. When a defense can control tempo, it changes how a game unfolds. The offense doesn't have to chase points. The playbook stays open. Quarterbacks aren't forced into risky decisions just to keep pace. For a young quarterback already under constant pressure, that difference is everything. Ward's presence didn't fix the protection issues, but it slowed the spiral. Coverage on the outside allowed the pass rush to get home without selling out. Big plays became harder to find, and suddenly, games felt less frantic. That shift took weight off Sanders' shoulders, even if only slightly. It meant fewer desperate possessions, fewer must-score moments, and fewer situations where one mistake could swing the entire game. What made Ward's return so important was the contrast it created. The defense looked organized, disciplined, and intentional. The offense didn't. That gap made the underlying problem impossible to ignore. When one unit is doing its job, it exposes the failures of the other even more. Cleveland couldn't pretend anymore that everything would even out on its own. In a season full of instability, Ward became a quiet anchor. Not flashy, not loud, just reliable. And in Cleveland, reliability has a way of revealing uncomfortable truths, because once the defense held up its end, the spotlight snapped right back to the offensive line and the quarterback standing behind it. And that's when the conversation inside the organization took a sharper turn.
Cleveland has seen this pattern before, and that's what made this moment so uncomfortable. Talent arrives, hope follows, patience is preached, and somewhere along the way, momentum quietly slips through the cracks. Not because of one catastrophic decision, but because of a series of small hesitations that add up to something bigger. This franchise has spent years convincing itself that problems would smooth out with time, only to look back and realize time was the one thing they wasted most. That history started hovering over everything surrounding Sanders. Fans felt it, media hinted at it, and whether they admitted it or not, the people inside the building knew exactly what the fear was. Not that he wasn't good enough, but that he might be too resilient for his own good. That his ability to take hits, stay composed, and keep moving forward could unintentionally mask how fragile the situation really was. That's the identity problem Cleveland keeps running into. They fall in love with toughness and mistake it for sustainability. They celebrate quarterbacks who endure chaos instead of demanding environments that prevent it. And over time, that mindset doesn't create legends, it creates regret. Because confidence is easy to erode when protection becomes optional and survival becomes routine. Sanders feels different, and that's precisely why the concern hit harder. His composure isn't performative, it's natural. He doesn't look rattled when things collapse, and that makes it dangerously easy to justify leaving things as they are. But the league doesn't reward teams for how much punishment their quarterbacks can endure. It rewards teams that don't make endurance a requirement in the first place. This wasn't just about fixing blocking assignments or plugging holes. It was about deciding who the Browns wanted to be moving forward. Another franchise that asks its quarterback to carry dysfunction, or one that finally accepts that protecting talent is the responsibility of the organization, not the test of the player. That question hung over every decision, every press conference, every quiet adjustment. And once it was asked honestly, there was no going back to pretending this was just another rough stretch. The real impact of Kendrick Green's arrival didn't show up in a stat sheet, and that's exactly why it worked. It showed up in urgency, in body language, in the way practices suddenly felt louder without anyone raising their voice. When you add alignment mid-season, especially one pulled up under pressure, it sends a message that doesn't need explanation. Spots aren't guaranteed anymore. Comfort isn't protected. Accountability just got real. For the offensive line, that ripple hit immediately. Reps mattered more. Communication tightened. Mistakes that used to linger now got corrected on the spot. No one wanted to be the weak link when the team had finally admitted that weakness was costing them something precious. Green didn't walk in as a savior. He walked in as competition. And sometimes competition does more than talent ever could. What stood out was how quickly that energy spread. This wasn't just about one position group. When linemen start moving with urgency, the offense feels it. Timing improves, confidence inches back. Even the quarterback feels the difference, not because everything is suddenly clean, but because effort is unmistakable. Protection doesn't have to be perfect to matter. It just has to be intentional. The move also exposed a deeper truth about how Cleveland had been operating. Waiting for perfect fits, ideal timing, or long-term solutions had left them frozen. Green's integration flipped that thinking on its head. It was a reminder that sometimes action, even imperfect action, is better than hesitation, especially when development is on the line and confidence is still forming. Inside the locker room, the message landed exactly where it needed to. This wasn't a symbolic gesture for the fans. It was an internal line in the sand. The Browns weren't just talking about change anymore. They were injecting it directly into the room. And that shift, subtle as it looked from the outside, started reshaping how everyone approached the rest of the season. Because once a team chooses urgency over comfort, it becomes impossible to unsee what's been holding them back. This season was never going to be about banners or parades. That truth has settled in quietly, without ceremony. The standings don't tell a story of dominance, and the stat lines don't scream breakthrough. But not every season that matters shows up in the win column. Some seasons exist to expose reality, and this one has done exactly that for Cleveland. What will linger isn't a single game or a signature moment, it's the pivot. The moment the Browns stopped pretending everything would sort itself out and finally responded to what was happening in front of them. Mid-season adjustments, hard conversations, roster moves that felt reactive at first but revealed intention underneath. This wasn't clean or pretty. It was messy, late, and uncomfortable, but it was real. For years, this franchise has lived in reaction mode, waiting for things to break before acknowledging they were cracked. This season forced them to confront that habit, to choose direction instead of delay, to accept that development isn't passive, it's protected, and that belief, once internalized, changes how an organization operates long after the final whistle. If Cleveland follows through, this stretch will be remembered as the point where denial gave way to clarity, where protecting the quarterback stopped being a talking point and became policy, where accountability replaced optimism and urgency replaced hope. That shift doesn't guarantee success, but it finally creates a foundation where success is possible. Years from now, this season may not be recalled for how it ended, but for what it started. The moment Cleveland acknowledged who its future was and acted like it mattered. Protecting a quarterback isn't about one season, one roster move, or one stretch of games. It's about belief. Belief that the player you've committed to is worth building around, not just surviving with. And for the first time in a long time, Cleveland is acting like it understands that difference. They didn't make this shift because everything was falling into place. They made it because they saw how close they were to losing something before it ever fully arrived. They saw
hits, the pressure, the patience wearing thin, and they chose to respond instead of deflect. That choice, even if it came late, matters more than people realize. Shedeur Sanders has taken punishment, absorbed chaos, and still managed to lead with composure. Not because it was easy, but because he never had another option, and the organization finally recognized what that demanded in return. Protection isn't a luxury for young quarterbacks, it's the cost of believing in them. This season won't be remembered for glory, but it might be remembered for honesty. The point where Cleveland stopped gambling on maybe and started acting on now, where urgency replaced hesitation and the future stopped being something they talked about and started being something they protected. And whether this moment came just in time or almost too late is a question that will hang over everything that comes next, because once a franchise admits who it can't afford to lose, there's no turning back.